Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Imagining America Teaching and Learning Circle. How beautiful to see some familiar faces and some familiar names. I'm Erica Cole-Arenas. I'm the Faculty Director of Imagining America and also Faculty in American Studies here at UC Davis. I welcome you to, as we always do in our teaching and learning circles, to introduce yourselves in the chat, where you're coming from, anything about yourselves, greet one another, virtual wave at one another. We, in these teaching and learning circles, we like to use the chat as our community forum. And so please feel free to ask your questions there, share resources there, make a comment or a chat or an emoji or whatever you can do in that chat. And Trina, our membership director of Imagining America, give a wave, Trina, will be watching and monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, she'll be collecting them for afterwards. And so that you know, because we often get this question as we go through the agenda together, we often share back the recording and any resources shared in the chat. So it will not disappear, it will be saved for you. So welcome again to the Teaching and Learning Circle. We affectionately like to call these the TLCs. And I know these days we all need TLC desperately in these challenging times. The Teaching and Learning Circle was founded about 2 years ago, before Zoom was an essential service. And we found that they were really immediately successful and really appreciated by members of the Imagining America network and beyond. So the main purpose of the TLCs is to build community, to build dialogue, build peer support, and also to help us address as a community some of the challenging questions that come up for us in teaching, in learning, and in organizing that we do in our communities and campuses. And we kind of ended up over the last couple of years having two formats. One format is rather large. You might have participated in one or two of those. The Third University is Possible with Wayne Yang and Jack Chen, and a couple others where we actually opened it up to the public. So about 50% are general public participants, like a real live public webinar. We save 50% of spots for IA members. And then we also have more intimate members-only conversations. Because as you know, with those really big 200-person sessions, we really can't have conversations with one another. So we're really excited to return to our small IA member format with you here today. This will be a session focusing, as you know, on the idea of cluster organizing. And cluster organizing is a model you hear a lot about by our guest speakers, Rissi Zimmermann and Maria Avila. And it really involves cross-institutional, cross-university community organizing that's been really active in Southern California in the IA network in the Southern California region. I won't describe a whole lot about what that is because that's what our guest speakers are here to do today. But I will say that the model is based on years and years of organizing and thinking that Maria Avila kind of founded and featured in her book, Transformative Civic Engagement Through Community Organizing. I highly recommend you check out the book where she doesn't quite focus on the SoCal cluster, but it's really the emergence of the cluster organizing model. So I cite that book as a great reference, and the team here and the lead organizer, Rissi, and last year lead organizer, Celestina Castillo, have really been building on and shaping this model. So quite a bit to check out afterwards and conversations to continue with Imagining America. We see this session as an organizing session, as our coach Maria always reminds us. So there will be follow-up, but without further ado, and I don't want to take up too much of their time, I welcome you all, and I now will introduce our guest leaders today of our conversation, and we'll then turn it over to them. So we first have Rissi Zimmermann, who's currently the lead organizer of the SoCal Cluster. Rissi is the founding creative director of the Los Angeles-based Socomba Performing Arts Company. With the mission to foster roots of unity through inclusive spirit of the arts, SoComba facilitates programming which encourages creative self-expression as a channel for holistic dialogue across diverse communities. At age 15, and I love this, she was given the opportunity to move to New York City and attended the LaGuardia Performing Arts School, where as a student, she created a mentorship program addressing social emotional challenges the students were facing there. So she started early. Upon receiving her Bachelor of Arts from University of Southern California, Rissi began working in a wide variety of socially responsive education programs. And after serving as a core member of the SoCal Cluster, she now has taken on the role of the lead organizer with the intention of fostering community-based learning across SoCal's higher ed institutions. I didn't know this, but was excited to learn outside of her work in educational settings, Rissi has been grateful for an international dance career, working with artists such as James Taylor, the Plain White T's, Pink Floyd, Jody Gates, Bradley Rapier, and Meredith Monk, and many other projects, both educational and performance-based. So welcome, Rissi. We also have with us, as I already mentioned, Maria Avila, who's a longtime leader in the Imagining America Network. Maria is Associate Professor in the Social Work Department at California State University, Dominguez Hills. Her research methodologies are collaborative research and action and narrative inquiry. Her research includes civic engagement and community organizing in higher education, and her teaching includes critical and community-based pedagogies, as well as creative expressions. Her research and teaching are underpinned by a larger context of the role of higher education in democratic societies. And as I mentioned, and as featured in her book, Avila began her education in social work and her community organizing work in the rural areas of Ciudad Juarez, Mexico in the 1970s. She earned a master's in social service administration at the University of Chicago and her PhD in adult and community education at Maynooth University in Ireland. Avila was the founding director of the Center for Community-Based Learning at Occidental College, a key center for the SoCal Cluster. And she has given numerous workshops, keynote speeches, conference presentations in Mexico, US, Ireland, and England. Prior to working in higher education, Avila worked as a community organizer with the Industrial Areas Foundation, the international network founded by the late Saul Alinsky in 1940. So you can see community organizing is part of her and the SoCal Cluster's DNA. So it is my honor to welcome Rissi and Maria. I will hang in there and enjoy the show with you all. And again, don't hesitate to write your questions and comments in the chat. And I look forward to engaging with you all. Rissi.
Thank you very much, Erica, for your wonderful introduction. And welcome, everyone. It is so wonderful to see all of you here today. And I just want to take a moment to embrace the significance of meeting during this time right now, just considering what this means for our national community, really to be thinking about organizing and culture change during this time, during such a transformational time of our history. So thank you everyone for choosing to be here. And I just want to mention about our format for today, that we are going to give you some history and context about our cluster. We will then have a moment to reflect through one-on-one conversations about the topics that we are bringing up, and then share back and have a Q&A at the end to wrap up. Before we do any of that though, we are going to take a moment just to gather our collective focus. So I invite you just to take a moment to check in with yourself, take a deep breath together, and really just to gather our focus into the significance we get to meet for the next 75 minutes. I know sometimes when we are together virtually, it is more difficult to continue to keep our collective focus and attention with everyone. But we really just want to invite all of you to release any unneeded thoughts, any unneeded tension, and just to gather here. So I'm going to take a few moments of silence, and I invite you for this even to close your eyes if you like to, and just take three deep breaths for yourself. And with every inhale, thinking about what is running through you at the moment, what is bringing you here today, the significance of what this dialogue might bring to your work, to your personal narrative, And with every exhale, to just release anything that is not relevant to this moment and to this meeting. So like I said, I'll just give a moment of silence. I invite you to close your eyes. I'm going to close mine. And just taking 3 deep breaths on your own time. Thank you. Okay, and as we open our eyes and gather back together, I am going to pass it over to Maria, and I will share a little bit more about myself and my journey later on as well.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Rissi, so much for leading us into a moment of silence and a moment of breathing, conscious breathing. Rissi is our lead organizer for the cluster at the moment. And with the breathing that she led us into, I just was reminded of how grateful I am of having her with us in the cluster from the beginning until now, and to everything that she brings to an otherwise often could turn into a totally dry and academic way of interacting with each other. And so I'm really grateful that she wakes up other ways of being for all of us. So thank you, Rissi.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, so I like to start by just telling you a little bit about my journey with Imagine America, and Erica mentioned some of it already in her introductions. But I think it grounds the reason why we even started or even thought of starting a cluster, a regional organizing cluster. So I have been involved with Imagine America since 2008, but really engaged, deeply engaged, only since 2012. And that began because in 2012, Tim Eatman and Scott Peters became co-directors of Imagine America. And through a very long-term relationship that I've had, working relationship I've had with Scott, from, mentoring me with my beginning writing to being my external during my PhD defense in Ireland, all kinds of things. Tim and Scott invited me to co-design and co-facilitate a community organizing institute. So we did this. It was a 2-day institute. Some of you may have been there. It was in 2013 in my second year with USC, doing my postdoc there. And we did that because we just wanted to explore whether community organizing would have any resonance at all to anybody in academia. I mean, we knew here and there that that made sense to some folks, but we thought having folks together in an institute that where we actually have the opportunity to have them interact with each other, to be part of this workshop that I led, and do some really deep thinking about whether it makes sense, and if so, why. And so we invited teams, which included faculty, community partners, students, and senior level administrators. And so that was the beginning of my deep engagement with Imagine America. But my work began when I started my bringing my organizing practice to higher education started at Occidental College, when I became the founding director of the Center for Community-Based Learning there. and where I started integrating community organizing practices with civic engagement. So that was the beginning of my civic engagement work. And that work led me to want to do a PhD, because I wanted to see if I could take what I had learned and done at Occidental somewhere else. So I went to Ireland and experimented with it. And then I brought it to USC in a 2-year postdoc to continue experimenting. So you can tell that I was really merging my community organizing background with my academic, my scholarship as an engaged, civically engaged scholar. In a really rather organic way, at least that's how it felt to me. It has felt to me all along. And so then we were prepping before we started this. And I said to folks, I remind you that everything I do is organizing, and why waste any opportunity? So this right now, right, is an organizing opportunity. And so when I became part of the National Advisory Board with Imagine America, which was in 2015, that coincided with my beginning role as tenure faculty at California State University, Dominguez Hills. And so of course, I couldn't resist. I gotta bring those two roles together and now explore this kind of, merging community organizing with civic engagement at a regional level. So I had now the credentialing through the board with Imagine America, and I had it through my role as tenure track faculty. And so that's how I started, thinking about how can I go about this? And anybody who knows anything about me or has read my book or, has had any interactions with me at all, knows that to me, the most important part of organizing anything that we hope would be long lasting starts with relational meetings. So I reached out to colleagues that I had known for a number of years and that I knew might have some resonance with my idea, my vision of creating a cluster. And so one-on-one meetings with those folks and really probing, if this were to be of interest to you, why? And what would it do for you? What would it do for your institution, community, organization? And would it be yet another layer of work for you? Or could it be something that actually integrates with what you are already doing? Because to me, that's really important, right? We're always stretching and adding layers to our work, and it becomes totally taxing and unrealistic, really. And oftentimes we end up just like frustrated because we can't keep up with it all. So to me, it really matters that when I do these one-on-one meetings, that I have real conversations with those folks about, I'm not selling you anything. I'm not inviting you to do anything really. I'm not asking you to do anything really. I'm really just asking you to think with me, to talk with me about whether or not this might serve any purpose of what you think your mission, your vision is through your work. And if it can be integrated with your work. If that makes sense, then let's get started. So we started meeting, about 5 of us, monthly at first. And then we thought that having each one of us take turns hosting the meetings would help not only in all of us learning about each other's engagement work, but also that it would give the hosting institution an opportunity to bring other folks from the campus and their communities to this growing project. And so as the cluster began to expand, it kept growing. Then we moved our meetings to bi-monthly to make it realistic for our workload. Again, I'm always keeping that in mind, is this realistic? And really always revisiting, are we still, on the same page about why we're doing this? So that really becomes part of all of the meetings, and it evolves. And of course, my hope, my aspiration in doing all the work that I do, my organizing is about finding ways to create change within the cultures of our institutions, our organizations, the way we do things, to from what feels like sometimes not digested, not well planned, not premeditated, not all of those things, and very hyperactive way in which we function. And in cultures where our work is often not at the center of our institutions and organizations, to a culture where all of that begins to shift. So more collaborative, more integrating that into the ways in which our institutions, organizations value and reward this kind of work, rather than it's just there and it's great that this center is doing, this person is doing it. So that is my vision, my aspiration, my hope in everything that I do these days in higher ed. That's I'm working on my second book, and it's really continuing from my first book and focusing on 5 projects that I have been leading for the past 5 years or so, including this time the cluster. And the ways in which reflecting with folks that have been part of these projects and which will in fact be co-authoring themselves, authoring the chapters about those projects in the book, in an effort to continue the collaborative way of being throughout the writing and throughout the entire book. And so it's all based on, what I call collaborative research and action. Basically means that we learn as we go and as we do, and through narrative inquiry, which basically means that we are dialogical in our meetings, that we share stories, that we tell stories, and that we learn a lot that way. And so that's, I will just add that because I talk about culture change a lot, and through the 5 years that we have been together as a cluster, we have heard a lot of different perspectives about what that means. That means different people to different things to different people, right? So I just told you what it means to me. What it means to some other faculty, administrators, civic engagement staff that have been part of the cluster, for instance, is finding ways to create a more engaged student body, undergraduate student body. And in some ways we have learned, it has not even anything to do with engaging the students with outside of the campus, but engaging the students as a body internally first, and then having them think about how does their experience as undergrad students really connect with being engaged with each other, with the rest of the campus, and then eventually with the community. So that's one thing that we have heard. It means for some civic engagement directors, how to figure out ways to get more at the center of our institution, how to figure out ways to get more students and faculty to participate. So that would be a different kind of culture. And so for community partners, we've heard that for them, it's really just learning how to learn about the culture of higher education so that they can figure out how to better and more deeply engage with us. So those are some of the things that we learned about what creating culture change means. And let me just double check to see I'm not leaving anything out here. So, so I think that is really, that's really the most important things that I wanted to share. And then let me open it up for maybe a couple of questions, burning comments. We will have a Q&A section later, but if at this point anybody has any burning questions, burning comments, I'll take them before we move on to the next.
If folks could go ahead and put those in the chat, and then we'll make sure that we have those for the Q&A portion at the end. Thank you. Rissi, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Trina, and thank you, Maria, for sharing your story and the development of the cluster. Something that has been really beautiful to witness is the sense of collective leadership that really has emerged within the cluster. And I have been honored to witness that develop since the founding of the cluster. When I was a senior as an undergraduate student at the University of Southern California, is when I was very fortunate to be mentored by Dr. George Sanchez, who was one of the very few faculty members at USC who had a very holistic and humane approach to education, and who was working closely with Maria at the time. So when Maria approached George about founding the cluster, I was very lucky to be a part of this conversation, because during my time at USC, I was there as a Posse scholar, which the Posse Foundation is more of a social movement to shift the way of the approach to leadership within our country. And so I was at USC as a first generation college student and very disoriented by the values at the institution, and not really understanding why the institution was focused more on its business values rather than its educational values. And so when I was introduced to Imagining America, and especially the cluster, I felt so grateful to be introduced to leaders who were leading with values that I really wanted to follow. And it was something so special to attend the first cluster meeting, which was at Maria's home. She invited us all to her home and she cooked for us. And we were in the kitchen together and we were making food and we were sharing our personal stories. And it was the first time in the 4 years of my undergraduate degree that I really felt like I was in a truly holistic educational setting, because we were learning over meals. We were really sharing our family stories, our narratives, and all from different perspectives. And we were also from different institutions. So having these dialogues really were connecting us at our heart values. We were understanding where we each were coming from in our stories. And also what was special is that we weren't a title first, but we were humans first. And that's the tone that Maria set from bringing together the cluster, and where I really felt the culture was shifting. Just the fact that we were holding space in this way with each other was giving a different culture to the work that we were doing than a lot of the times the institutions that we were finding ourselves in. And so this is really what set the groundwork for the cluster in my experience with it. Like I said, at the time I was still a student and getting involved as a student and continuing to be a part of these dialogues as I transitioned to being a part-time staff member as a program coordinator at the University of Southern California and leading my own organization. And so through this, I really got to witness how the leadership within the cluster became truly collective. So what happened was that the meetings that we had, like Maria mentioned, they would be hosted by someone else every time we met. So this allowed us to really get to know the home base of each of our members better, the culture at each of the institutions that we were visiting better. Every member who hosted also was coordinating the agenda. So this meant that every member was also contributing to the content of what we were meeting about. However, even though the host would maybe lead the facilitation of creating the agenda, every member was contributing to the content of what we were sharing, what we were discussing. So I remember this with Maria, even from our very first meeting. For every agenda item, she would check in with every individual at the meeting and ask, how is this for you? What are your feelings on this? What are your thoughts on this? So automatically everyone was engaged in every part of the thinking process. And moving forward in between our meetings, each person was thinking actively about what are our next steps. So at the end of every meeting, everyone was leaving with some type of ownership, some type of task that they would carry on until the next time we met. And so this was moving forward the work on our own campuses and our own institutions, but also moving forward the cluster as a whole collectively. So it was never just one person that was making the decisions or setting the agenda or setting the structure, but it was really everyone involved who was a part of this conversation. And of course, our cluster continued to grow and the members continued to shift as members took on different roles at their institutions, but the collectivity of the leadership continued to stay alive. So how that worked was that before every meeting, we would meet with the core leaders of the cluster. So we would meet at least 30 minutes before, and we would talk through the agenda. We would share roles within the agenda. Then after the meeting ended, we would continue to meet with the core leadership to reflect on the meeting and talk about our thoughts and feelings on what worked well in the meeting, what we could have changed in the meeting, and then what we learned and can adjust for our next meeting. So continuously, we are wrapped up in very collaborative dialogue. And when I'm referring to our core leadership, this is usually a group of 5 to 6 of us, or sometimes 3 to 5 of us, that are more consistently involved than some of our other members who are maybe able to just join our bi-monthly meetings but aren't able to prepare the agenda every time, for example. So we also have different layers of involvement depending on the extent at which someone's available to meet with us and the consistency at which someone's available to meet with us. And this is also something that has developed over time very organically. So after Maria founded the cluster in 2015, we continued to meet bi-monthly. And then in 2016, started also continuously presenting and sharing at the Imagining America conferences. So in 2016 in Milwaukee, we had a panel presentation. In 2017 at UC Davis, we had a follow-up workshop to share the development of the cluster. And then in 2018 in Chicago, we had a presentation in which 7 institutions within our cluster shared different civically engaged projects within their campuses. And so for each of these preparations for the conference presentations, again, we would collectively decide on the format, we would collectively decide on the content, and then we would have deflective meetings after the presentations as well to think about how we could adjust things for the next conference, how we could move things forward for the next year. So always continuing to develop very organically up until today, where we've continued our bi-monthly meetings throughout the years. We've continued to share civically engaged programming throughout each of our institutions and campuses at our regional meetings. And now that we have shifted to virtual learning, we have also shifted the context of our meetings dependent upon what our members are experiencing right now. So we really try to have our cluster be alive and organically responding to the needs of the members, to the conversations that we have, to what we are experiencing, so that there's never a structure or a hierarchy that we can't shift depending on what we are experiencing. And this is also how the leadership and the lead role has shifted over time. Since Maria founded the cluster, she was leading a lot of these dialogues, facilitating a lot of these collective and collaborative agendas until 2019, when Celestina Castillo, who had also been with the cluster since the founding of it, took over this lead organizer role. And then Celestina held this role for a year and then stepped down this year in fall 2020, and I took over the role. So something that was really beautiful about witnessing this is that, again, it was a very organic process in which Celestina took on this leadership role from Maria after having worked together very closely since the beginning of the cluster. And then the same happened for me when I was able to take on the role. I had already been involved and witnessed the leadership for 5 years. So when I step into this role, of course, everyone will take on a leadership role in a different way, but it's all about the relationships that we've formed over time that continue to evolve organically. And that's what really, I think, is the heart of the cluster, is this collectivity that connects us all. So that being said, we do have some of our cluster members here today, and we would like to invite them to share some of the value that they have experienced from being a part of the cluster. Because as Matt and I both mentioned, it's something so unique to each of us, what culture change means to us. how community-based learning functions at our institutions. What are the challenges we're encountering? Each of us have unique experiences and relationships, also dependent on how we're involved in our institutions, if we're students, faculty, or staff. So I am going to invite some of our members to share just short testimonials to give you a little bit of context on what the cluster might have meant throughout their involvement with it. So Celestina, if you would like to start, I would like to invite you to share.
Hello, everyone. I'm Celestina Castillo. As Rissi mentioned, I was one of the founding members of the SoCal Cluster. I was the director of the Center for Community-Based Learning at that time. And what has really been valuable to me about the cluster is being able to develop relationships with people who are deeply committed to community engaged scholarship and teaching and learning, but also to really dig into this concept of culture change and what that means for each of our institutions individually and ideally for higher ed as a whole. And so it is a kind of, it can feel like a very nebulous idea, this idea of culture change. But when I think about the cultures that have been established within higher education that are very individualistic, very like you're expected to separate your community from your individual scholarship and teaching, right? To me, that just never really made sense. And so to find other folks who were thinking about that and talking about it in very different ways was very valuable for me and continues to be valuable to me as I return to a PhD program. And, as I want to be a faculty member in the future who continues to integrate this kind of thinking into my scholarship and teaching and mentorship of students in the future. So I'll stop there. And I'm grateful to be here. I will have to leave at 10:45, 5-ish, because I have class.
Thank you, Celestina. We have another one of our founding members, George Sanchez, with us. I invite you to share.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm George Sanchez. I'm a full professor at the University of Southern California, and I've really enjoyed my time from the very beginning of the cluster. I was involved with Imagining America, have been involved from almost the very start of Imagining America. And I just wanted, the things that I think I've gotten out of the cluster is something that Celestina said, which is to have deep engagement with very specific people with the same sorts of commitments. It was less important to me to be with full professors or to be, but more the deep commitment to community engagement and the deep thinking about it among people who I respect tremendously. That was something missing in my life, and I wasn't getting it from USC, no matter how big it is. And so reaching out really helped that. The other thing, which I think is very important about our cluster, is that it's all based in Southern California institutions. And that means for me a number of things. It means that, we're in a majority minority state. We have some of the similar sorts of civic engagement issues, such as our work with the undocumented, our commitments to diversity at each of our local campuses. Having that conversation is so important. So that you don't have to start it over every time. National meetings, I think, are great, but sometimes don't share the same kind of local connections that we do in the cluster, because we're all from Southern California. We know this area, and we're committed to social justice in this area. And that has certain implications. And I think having that, sharing that was always really dramatically important to me. So I really appreciate the mutual support that the cluster has provided to me individually and then to USC more collectively as an institution. Thanks.
Thank you, George. And we have Adrian here as well. Adrian, if you're able to share.
Hi, everyone. So I am a Occidental graduate and now PhD student at the University of Southern California in Dr. Sanchez's department. And I would say the Also to Matthew Reynolds' question, which is actually what I was going to speak about in terms of the recommendations or strategies for this sort of disparate but cooperative group, is being roped into the process for me was very organic. It wasn't coming to the Imagining America SoCal Cluster meeting. It was going to a meeting because Celestina invited me. And so I think it's basically what I'll say is the great thing about this group is pinpointing different people across these campuses that have established relationships or that you want to have relations with. And then the cluster is just one of many ways that we come together and collaborate.
Thank
I'll
you.
keep that to a minute.
And Patty Robinson.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Patty Robinson and I am the Faculty Director of Civic and Community Engagement at College of the Canyons. We're a 2-year institution and many of you probably know where we are, but we're located in North LA County in Valencia. I met Maria, I think it's probably been a little over 3 years ago, maybe closer to 4. And she had invited me to have lunch with her so she could talk about Imagining America. I was very intrigued with Imagining America. I had been at a conference and it was like, I want to learn more about this group. And after meeting with her and learning more about what it had to offer, it was like, this is fantastic. As someone coming from the community colleges, we don't always have these kinds of opportunities that allow us to have these intersegmental kinds of partnerships where we are able to partner with 4-year institutions. And so Imagining America has been a great sort of catalyst in doing that. And I forged many different kinds of relationships, some of which have actually ended up now working, we're working together in collaborative situations. And so this organization has really allowed for those kinds of opportunities, those kinds of networking opportunities, sharing ideas, again, bringing that sort of emphasis of civic and community engagement that we all share and love and have a passion for, bringing like-minded folks together. So from our standpoint, as someone, again, representing the community college, this has been a great opportunity.
Thank you, Patty. And then we have Kelsey, who's a former member, who will also share some reflections when she was with us.
Have a day. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rissi and Maria, for bringing me into this space. It's so joyful to see everyone again after some time away. For those who don't know, I work at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington now. My position title is the Community Learning Specialist, and that means I facilitate everything community engaged learning and research at Whitman. I'm also fortunate enough to be part of a new Mellon grant that the Northwest 5 Consortium colleges received that is focused exclusively on regional community engaged learning and research. And so the cluster model taught me, I feel, almost everything I need to know about entering into a new 5-year grant position that is all about focusing on how do you build interconnectivity between institutions that are quite different. Matt, my colleague, posted a question into the Q&A box that I think speaks to that perfectly. And what I always come back to with that difficult question is this idea of relationality. How do we build relationships that are deep and long lasting enough that it's not about the check boxes that we tick for the grant? It's about, I know that this person has these resources, I have these, they can connect in a way that is mutually beneficial and reciprocal for all involved, not just the institutions, but community partners as well. Of course, an internal thank you to Celestina. She, like with Adrian, brought me into this work in a way that, as Maria said, is very organic, felt more like joining in a meeting, but really became something that guides how I live my life professionally and personally. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kelsey. And just to wrap up, I see Alan, you are here with us as well. Would you like to share a quick reflection?
Certainly. So I'm at Occidental College, and I met Maria when she was first starting to organize and develop the Center for Community-Based Learning at Occidental. And it was really transformative in my work. I'd been involved in social justice issues around mathematics at the undergraduate level, but I was finding myself quite frustrated with institutional culture and with changing culture in my department. And the way that Maria works, it's not just grounded in relationships. That's extremely important, but really the process of collective inquiry is very much the scientific method to me. It's exploring, it's planning, it's carrying things out, and then the reflection, of course, is the key thing. And so I found that to be, as I say, really transformative in my work. I got very involved with the Center for Community-Based Learning there, and we were able, over a period of some 15 years, to really bring that work into the center of the institution. I had not been in touch with Maria for a few years, but when Celestina left the college to pursue the PhD program, I reconnected through Imagine America. And as several others have commented, the thing that is most valuable to me is the people connected with this and the way the people work together in this group. And it's informing ways I teach, as well as ways I'm starting to work with local teachers and some other groups at the college now. So it's been very valuable. I'm very happy to be part of it.
Thank you, Alan. And thank you everyone for sharing your testimonials. So as you can see, though there is a through line of a lot of the ways in which the cluster is valuable to everyone, there are also very unique and individual reflections on how it relates to everyone's work. And so this is also present in our cluster meetings. What we do is when we rotate our the hosting of the meetings, we also have the institutions that are hosting usually share a bit about the projects, the civically engaged projects that our members are involved in there, so that we can also continue to learn how community-based learning looks different at each of our campuses and how there are tools that are transferable to each of our institutions or each of our projects. But as we've been emphasizing, is that the most important part of this work is the relational work that we do also one-on-one. So the conversations that we have leading up to becoming cluster members, the conversations that Maria has had with each of the members that she has brought in. And we continue to have these one-on-one conversations. So even as I took over this lead organizer role, the biggest part for me is to have all of these one-on-one conversations with current and with our current members, with previous members, with those interested in joining our cluster, and especially during this time. So we don't only check in at our meetings, but we really try to continue to have these individual dialogues to understand what is at the center of our hearts and of our values, and how is this shifting and changing and continuing to relate to our work. So that being said, we want to give you an opportunity also to reflect through one-on-one conversation today during our webinar. So we would like to pose some questions for you to reflect on in pairs, because that's really where it all begins. So if you might be interested within your work to do regional organizing or to approach some of this, these types of dialogues within your own communities, this is a chance to reflect and to really start with the question of, how does this relate to your work? How does this relate to your story? So we will put these questions in the chat as well. I am going to share them with you here. Questions that we would like you to reflect on. The first is, how is your current or future work connected to your personal story? And how has your passion and commitment for this work been influenced by your narrative? So this is really about you and your personal story. So if so, tell a 1-minute story that illustrates this. The second part being, what are your thoughts about organizing for culture change? And are there any parts of the culture in your institution or organization or community that you would like to change? And the last part being, can regional cluster organizing help in your current or future work? And if so, how?
The questions are in the chat. If Erin could just begin the process of getting people in pairs. And then we can do that for 8 minutes.
So then you can just hit join breakout room when you get the invitation to.
Hi, Kelsey. Hi, Patty.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much for giving your testimonials. Hi, Alan. Thank you for speaking too. Hey, Kimberly, I hadn't seen you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Maria.
Welcome back, Melissa. Hi, Julissa. I hadn't seen you in a while. Good to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah. So are we ready to get back? Are we all back? Yep. So to make use of our few minutes left, let's go right into just, what folks are coming back with from your one-on-one meetings. It could be, related to one or two questions that we posted. It could be just something completely different. What are you all coming back with? And then we'll just start this. And if there are some questions that emerge through this process, we'll get into the questions. And then Trina, did you want me to start by answering the question, or we let them debrief first? We let them debrief first, yeah? Okay. So talk to me, talk to us, anybody? How'd it go? Raise your hand.
So I was in a breakout room with Alan, and one of the things that we discovered that was sort of in common, even though we're from different sorts of institutions, is that some of the structures and hierarchies in place in our institutions prevent or provide obstacles for people to do the kind of work that they want to do, that's important to do, and that's really interesting to do. And that we talked a little bit about how is it possible to begin to break down some of those barriers and obstacles. We didn't come up with an answer, so if anybody has one, we would be happy to hear it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh. Hi, I was in a group with Araceli and Kimberly, and kind of a couple things that we found in common. One, that this work doesn't always exist with a dedicated position. I think all three of us are doing this kind of work layered with, in addition to, or sometimes on our own time, but finding a way to try and make it a priority. But it's not always recognized. And yet at the same time, there may be a learning outcome or a strategic initiative that focuses on it, but it doesn't always get elevated or lifted or put front and center. So I think that also kind of relates to the structural obstacles or priority, the obstacles of priority.
Maybe one more?
Briefly to mention the opportunities for intergenerational
sharing of knowledge. So there's just that regional, but also, how much I can learn from people who have been doing this for, I consider myself new in the field, who have been doing this for a long time. It's pretty valuable. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And so there was a question that was placed on the chat about, which I think some of you have alluded to, about different kinds of institutions or even organizations, and how does that get defined? Maybe Trina, because I don't see the question, but you wrote it. You read it.
Sure. So when you have different campuses and partners with different levels of experience, maybe resources, things like that, coming together, sometimes it can be hard to get on the same page in terms of goals and outcomes. So how do you do that?
Yeah, so I think that several of us alluded to that, and it really is, this is very relational, right? This is very organic to the extent that we can do this. So we usually start with somebody from the group, from the core leadership group, usually, that has the closest connection with that person who's interested in joining. We'll have a one-on-one meeting, and there begins the process of defining similarities, ways in which we may have resonate. And so, but really everything becomes part of a process that evolves through those meetings and then through the larger cluster meetings. So these are conversations, right, where the different cultures of the institutions, organizations, get defined, get discussed, where goals and purposes are discussed and shared. And so it's not necessarily that we all have to be absolutely exactly on the same page. We have a community college, Patty Robinson, that's a very different kind of institution, and she's hung out with us with like 3 or 4 years already. So obviously, she found something there. We have private institutions, we have public state universities, we have different kinds of institutions. So I think a lot of it really relates to what is it that you think you bring to the group, and what is it that you think you can get from the group. And that gets defined in a process, not as a beginning, this is what the goals are, this is what the purpose is, but it gets defined in the conversation. And it is an unusual way of how we all operate in our private lives and our professional lives, right? So it takes getting used to it. And so that is the process, because only in that way can we really build this kind of collective vision and purpose, and then to be able to work together and sustain our work together over time. And like I said at the beginning, it really is important that we all figure out ways of creating this kind of work in a way that integrates with the rest of what matters to us. So it's not adding yet another layer. If it gets to that point, then it's really hard to sustain, right? So that's a big one for us. Are there any other questions? Maybe one more before we move on to the wrapping up. How do I join a cluster? So Trina can maybe put you in touch with Rissi, who is our lead organizer, and then we'll take it from there. That's how it begins.
Yeah.
One of the first things we did as a group was read your book, Maria. That was super helpful. Not a paid sponsor. Oh, I thank you for that. So maybe one more question or comment before we start wrapping up? No? Well, thank you all very much. It's really, really
Looks like
good.
Patty had a question.
Sorry, I was just going to make a comment. It actually goes back to the conversation that Kelsey and I had. And I think one of the biggest things that comes out of this kind of work that we're doing, and then having something like this where we're joined together, it allows like-minded people to find each other. And we all share that same kind of passion. And so I think that's what's so much a part of this kind of work and the work that you're doing, Maria, and bringing people together like this. It's not like we're out there just doing this by ourselves. And so, you know, I really appreciate all that you're doing and certainly bringing us from all walks of life together.
Thank you, Patty. Can I say just one more really quick thing? Is that to me, it has been absolutely essential being part of this cluster, you know, creating the cluster and credentialing me on my campus. So it has allowed me to do all kinds of things on my campus that maybe it would have been a lot harder for me, like building collaborative spaces with faculty and with community partners and students in different ways. A lot of that is going to be in my next book, and also getting my campus to join. So bringing this to the attention of the provost and, you know, other higher up senior level administrators that that, you know, were part of this and are now one at least attended the last conference. So it's really using the cluster, not just to bring us together, because that's always great, it's very needed, but also to help you look at how can it help you do the things that you're needing to do within your institution. So I'll pass it on to Trina.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you all, everyone who joined today. Just in terms of next steps, what we're hoping to do is take this recording, as well as Celestina has created a document, which I shared in the chat and which was shared in the recommended readings before the webinar. You hopefully should have gotten an email with those. So I'll make sure that we have that recording, that document, and some notes from this webinar that are shared out to you all and everyone who registered. And we are also going to work on putting that up on our website. Additionally, I will be doing some follow-up to everyone who registered to really start thinking about, given, you know, the interest that you have expressed, as well as maybe for folks who couldn't register or attend, but you might be aware of who might be interested in this type of regional organizing. How can we get that going, you know, say in the Pacific Northwest or in the Southeast or the Midwest, different parts of Imagining America's network. So, so those are the planned next steps. So please look for some follow-up emails from me. And then I'm going to turn it over to Erica for a few final closing remarks.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Rissi and Maria, for leading us, and for the other SoCal Cluster members who shared your wisdom today. I think, you know, what I'm reflecting on really is the brilliance of this model, and I think, as you heard, it's a rigorous practice, a sustained practice of building deep human connections. And that, as Celestina and many of you who shared today said, it's about building human connections that enable us to be our full selves, not divided into these false boxes that our institutions often put us in or we find ourselves in. And I just want to say, I think that, you know, many of you know, I've learned from George and from others and some Imagining America research we're engaged in, that this is not by accident, right? Our institutions, and not just our institutions, but our disciplines, the ways of thinking and the ideas are often organized around competition, around individuality, around prestige, around an individual sense of mobility or assimilation, and against this kind of collectivist and collaborative culture that Maria, Rissi, and the cluster is trying to promote, right? So it's not by accident that we need to push against that and build new and build different cultures. So I encourage you to also look deeply into and push back on those institutional cultures that go against often the missions that our institutions prescribe to, such as we are community-based and public-facing, et cetera, but then only reward folks, and I don't mean just faculty rewards, but the way students are evaluated, the way partners are engaged, the way student mobility is framed around individualist and competitive norms, right? So I think this is really deep, important relational work, but it's also in the end political work, right? And so if you listen and learn from the work as you go, and as Maria left us with, this is work you then take to your institutional change projects, right? And so the final thing I'll close with that I've learned from Maria that I think is really brilliant and is the kind of next step, or what you bring those relationships to, is you never go into a meeting with a really critical decision to be made without having conversations with people and building those relationships. Who are your allies? Who are your blockers? Where have you had those conversations before that open up the heart to understand what you're really trying to do, right? So the next step is also the change project, right? So again, we like to stick to time because we know many of you have places to go and things to do, even if it's virtual. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. And as Trina said, there will be follow-up as always. We'll share the recording and the notes, and the cluster will be in touch as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. Be safe and well.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.